Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We have merged the streams here at WNST AM 1570, our traditional 22 years of radio now in one place at BaltimorePositive.com. All of our WNST traffic out there, and of course, known for our sports here, even during an election cycle. Luke Jones and I monitoring all things Indianapolis on Sunday afternoon, as the Ravens struggled mightily in the first half, pull it out in the second half. And, Luke, I guess it's sort of like a toddler here. Lamar Jackson, despite the MVP status, there are all these situations he hasn't seen yet, right? Like the situations that Phillip Rivers is all too familiar with in this league for 20 years. This was a little bit of a different kind of win. Sputter start, struggle, and then the second half, the old Lamar returns.
Well, I mean, we're going to focus on Lamar Jackson because that's what we do, but I don't think Lamar played that poorly in the first half. I thought their offensive line was awful. I thought that was really their major issue, and I'm not saying he was great, but this wasn't a case like last week where Lamar's turning the ball over and holding on to it too long, and Pittsburgh forces the strip sack and all of that. I mean, this was a situation, and I saw some different pundits on social media referencing offensive line play, and I don't even know if they were focusing on the Ravens game specifically or just looking at some other games around the league early Sunday afternoon. But you'll hear it over and over again. You can have a great quarterback, you can have talented skill players, you can have a bell cow running back, but if you don't get quality play up front, those things are only going to matter so much, and you're going to struggle, and you're not going to be the well-oiled machine that, frankly, this Ravens offense was last year. And I think in the first half, you saw an offensive line that they've missed Marshall Yanda all year. We'll call that what it is. And they really missed Ronnie Stanley. And, Matt Skura had a cut on his thumb, and they had issues even snapping the football, let alone blocking and opening up running lanes and protecting. So that offense in the first half was as bad as it's looked since the Chargers playoff loss 2 years ago. I mean, that's how bad that first half was. They didn't do anything. Sam Cook had, 5 punts in the first half? I think he had 5 punts in an entire game twice last year. So it just speaks to we haven't seen a whole lot of that the last couple of years. Even the struggles this year at times, it's been more choppy. It's been more inconsistent. That was just plain bad in the first half. But to this team's credit, and it's why I think this is such an enormous win for this football team, they come out in the second half, specifically in the third quarter, a little more rhythm, a little more tempo, some passes to get Lamar into a better rhythm, some quick passes so you're not putting quite as much pressure on the offensive line. They really threw the ball effectively over the middle of the field, which we know is what they do best from a passing standpoint. And even with Gus Edwards with the fumble, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, you just moved the ball down the field and you had this disastrous turnover. We then saw the defense come up and make a big play and give John Harbaugh some credit there on a challenge that so many of us were probably looking at it at first glance and say, wow, I can't believe he's doing that. But
it's a stupid rule, but we'll talk about that later.
We'll get into that in a little more detail. But I just think for this team, and I wrote about this at BaltimorePositive.com this week, leading into the game and in the aftermath here, I'm touching on it a little bit more, but we hear this term overcoming adversity all the time now. It's become a platitude. It's become cliche. You hear that from every team every single week. You hear that from every champion. And
I've written 2 books about that.
This was, but the Ravens said it at times last year. This team didn't have adversity last year. They really didn't. They had some hiccups in September, and
other than having their feelings hurt about Joe Flacco's cap number and a couple of things like that, right? Like once the season started, other than Cleveland and getting your feelings hurt early, there was nothing until they got run over, quite frankly, by the Titans, right?
Right, exactly. So they had this season where there was so little adversity, and yet this week, you look over the last 7 days leading into Sunday, you lose to your biggest rival, falling 2 games behind in the division coming into this weekend. You lose your second best offensive player, your franchise left tackle that you just gave a 9-figure contract to 2 days earlier. You find out Monday morning that your best defensive player tests positive for COVID-19. And as a result, you have 7 other defensive players have to isolate and miss the entire week of practice. And your back to where you were in the spring with some of these guys, where
And you
you're
got to
having
go on the
Zoom
road and
meetings.
play a pretty good team this week, right?
And that's right. And that's, you go down the list
And that
of
was a
every.
pretty good team. That defense,
Sure.
first half, I mean, 53's everywhere, literally, right?
Right. I mean, I didn't think it going into the game, and I certainly don't feel that way coming out of it. I don't think Indianapolis is an elite team in the AFC, but they're certainly a rock solid playoff contender. That's a bona fide, legitimate playoff caliber team right there, until they prove otherwise. But for this team to go through all those challenges that I just mentioned, to have just a brutal first half, I mean, they just could not move the ball at all. I mean, about the only thing you could say that the Ravens offense didn't do in the first half that, that would qualify as a disaster was they didn't turn the ball over at the very least, although they did that on their first drive of the second half, to kind of continue the misery. But they played well defensively. Early on, Terrell Bonds gets picked on a little bit. Other than that, they cleaned things up very quickly there. You got the sense, especially as you got into the second half, that Wink Martindale and this pass rush had no fear of Phillip Rivers and this Colts offense. So they played really well defensively, and that's why they were in a position that they were only down 3 points at halftime rather than it being 17-0, 20-0. I mean, that's how bad the offense was in that first half. If you have an average defense out there on Sunday, you're probably down 2 or 3 scores at halftime. But they come out, and as much as last week we focused on the running game, looking 2019 like, 265 yards rushing against Pittsburgh, what we saw in the second half on Sunday was Lamar Jackson and the passing game looking much more 2019 like. They've never been a high volume passing game. I know Lamar threw for 5 touchdowns a couple times last year, and he led the league in touchdown passes, but this is not an offense where he's going to throw for 350 yards. I mean, that's unless they're behind by a lot, that's about the only time you're envisioning that. But he didn't throw an incompletion in the second half. He was efficient. He made some big throws in some big spots. Really threw effectively over the middle of the field, and I mean, it was encouraging to see. It was the second half that reminded me a lot of what we saw last year. And I want to throw a stat at you that I put up on Twitter at the conclusion of the third quarter. Time of possession. How much have we talked about that going back to the end of 2018? This team's ability to run the football, sustain drives, keep the opposing offense off the field, and just, you kind of take the other team's will away. You take their soul away. I wrote about this a couple weeks ago with their inability to put the game away against Philadelphia. I called that the soul crusher. Those 7 or 8 minute drives that they would have in the fourth quarter last year. Time of possession in that third quarter, Nestor, 13:41 to 119 in favor of the Ravens.
And as long as the 119 wasn't a one-play 80.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's kind of hard to score when you only have the ball for a minute.
Well, and that's the thing, too. I mean, Phillip Rivers, he throws a pick right after the fumble, and you get the ball back. And, so we saw the offense find its rhythm in the second half. They didn't run the ball incredibly well in the second half, but they ran it well enough. And it was really those quick passes over the middle. It wasn't a full-blown no huddle, but they certainly played with more tempo. They were just so lethargic on the offensive side of the ball in the first half. That second half, it felt a lot like last year. And it wasn't a blowout. They didn't score 50 points, but that second half really felt a lot more like last year. So when you look at that and you do take the positive from last week where we talked about the fact that they moved the ball so well and they ran the ball so well against a really tough Steelers run defense, you're seeing some signs here. I'm not saying it's going to be as seamless and as smooth and as historically tremendous as it was last year, but the last couple of weeks we are seeing some encouraging signs from this offense. They haven't done it for a full 60 minutes. They didn't protect the ball well last week. That was, Lamar Jackson, 4 turnovers. But this week, first half, awful. Second half, looked a lot more like the 2019 Ravens offense in terms of just tempo and rhythm and controlling the clock and just doing things that we came to know this Ravens team to do so well last year. So I'm encouraged to see that. Now, you have to continue to build on it, and they're going to have some other challenging games coming up later in the month. Got a Sunday night trip to New England. But I think this is a game that maybe isn't quite the turning point that we would view, say, the Seattle game last year with the fourth down play, and they run power with Lamar Jackson and they score the touchdown there. Maybe it's not the turning point quite like that, but if this team ultimately gets back to a point where they're in position to make a deep January run, I think we will look back at this game and say, wow, they had a lot working against them going into that week, and they didn't play a very good first half of football by any means. But they took care of business on the road. They won another road game. And again, you saw a passing game that didn't put up monster numbers, but boy, was it efficient. And it's exactly what they needed after that nightmare first half on the offensive side of the ball.
Well, it really was a tale of two halves, right? Like, so if we're going to sit here this week and bitch about the game like we did last week, or bitch about them winning like we did 2-3 weeks ago after the Philadelphia game, it's which side are you happy or sad about? The awakening was a good thing. The fact that they've won in the way they've won, to your point, Stanley being down, Lamar not playing so well, Lamar going through an injury, which if there's a Purple Rain 3, we'll learn more about how banged up he was a couple of weeks ago when he's only running the ball twice, right? That we know things weren't right. Things start to look right, at halftime. And now New England ahead, and we'll get to all of that, but this was a reawakening a little bit, and also a referendum on John and coaching and leadership. I mean, I saw John this week on Sandusky or something. Looked like he hadn't slept in a week. You know what I mean? Like he really looked fatigued and tired and all of this. Sort of like when Biden came running out in Wilmington the other night, sort of like, a whole different step to him. I think the Ravens can have a whole different step based on the way they played in the second half, because you know what? And this was my takeaway on this. And when I write down little notes of things that I want to bring up in the first segment with you, hot off the game, it's a pretty good team, right? I mean, no Ingram, no Stanley, no Humphrey. Humphrey be back, I guess. No practice for 6-7 of these guys. Orlando Brown playing left tackle, and then, swearing on a stack of Sooners after the game that he's a left tackle, and that's what God meant for him to be. It's what his dad meant for him to be, and that he's taking a little chip about now he's the left tackle, and they have to go try to win a Super Bowl with him at left tackle. Maybe you read my work last week. But team's pretty good, dude. You know what I mean? Like, I looked at McCarry, and I looked at Skur, and I looked at Bozeman, and I looked at where they are, and I'm thinking, all those guys have played well at various points. Once they're all in there and Skur's not bleeding all over the football, I didn't hear Matt Skur's name from a snapping perspective, or Lamar having trouble with handing the ball. All the things we were concerned about 2 years ago. If they finally get this thing together the way they looked in the second half, they can be pretty good. Mark Andrews out there snot blocking on the left end. A lot of things. There's something to hand the T-shirt out in the meeting room all week long for Harbaugh this week that was a little bit about, gut check, right?
Yeah, I mean, and you want that. It doesn't – you can talk about culture and all the things that we talk about and leadership council and all those different things.
They haven't won a damn thing with this group outside of Sam Cook and Justin Tuck, right? I mean, there's only a handful of guys that are familiar with that old Dennis Pitta, Marshall Yonda, Flacco. Those guys are all gone.
Well, let's face it, and you hear this a lot, and this was talked about a little bit with the trade deadline this past week, and under normal times, we know COVID has complicated, the roster moves and things of that nature, but you can talk about winning a T-shirt or raising the Lombardi Trophy. This team's won T-shirts. They've earned T-shirts the last couple of years, and look, give them a lot of credit for that, because it's been a very young football team.
They've had a lot of happy Monday morning meetings.
Sure,
they really have.
Sure, they've won a lot of football games. I mean, look. What, Lamar tied Dan Marino as far as quarterback wins.
But they haven't won games by kicking field goals. I mean, they've won games. Like, they've just Monday, they get on the bus and I mean, this is another example. They won by 2 touchdowns on the road, dude. Like, and they sucked, kind of, sort of, for the moment. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the offense did. I mean, the defense still played well in the first half.
But when you beat teams by 2 touchdowns on the road, and it –
sure.
I've been on all 6 of those plane rides home. Well, 1 bus trip home from those losses in Indy. I mean, just going out and beating Indy by 2 touchdowns is something this franchise hasn't done in 25 years. So,
well, they hadn't beaten Indy in Indy. I mean, that's where they are. So, look, we can talk about Phillip Rivers and how potent that or lack thereof, I'd say, about Indianapolis's offense. That's why I think they're a playoff team. I don't think they're up there with Kansas City, the Ravens, Pittsburgh, maybe Tennessee, maybe not sure with their defense. But, I think Indianapolis has a really good defense, and that's where you are encouraged that the Ravens figured it out. You certainly don't like playing like that for 30 minutes because if you go up against a team with a better offense, like I said, you could have been down 2 or 3 scores at
Even Sam
halftime.
Cook
But
doesn't want to punt that much.
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's encouraging. And it's one thing to beat Washington by a couple scores on the road. It's another thing to beat a team that's right there trying to win their division and right there in the playoff race and, certainly has some really good players on that football team. So I'm encouraged by it. I don't think this is a clear-cut signal that the Ravens are, quote, back and suddenly we're going to see them start scoring 40 points a game. But I think when you go through something like they did over the course of the week and what they went through in the first half with, the offense, 55 yards, whatever it was at halftime, and you come out and you control the tempo and you move the ball down the field, and even with the fumble, which you're just thinking, oh my goodness, you finally put together a drive and you coughed it up inside the 10-yard line, and they came right back. Defense makes a play, and
you didn't even have a
right
tweet
back
for
and
that.
score.
You were so upset when they turned the ball over. I think your tweet was like incredible or something.
I think it was unbelievable. I think it was. And then the following play, I had some choice thoughts about John Harbaugh challenging it, but I've learned doing this long enough that let me see one replay at least. Which,
dude, I almost said a WT and an F in the tweet. I'm like, what?
Everyone did.
What was he thinking?
But I'll say this, and this is what I've learned as I've covered as many games, and especially from the press box where you don't always have a great vantage point depending on where on the field a play takes place, and you're trying to judge whether good challenge, good call, bad call. TV did not show a replay right away, so you just saw it in real time, and you're thinking, what in the world is John thinking about here? But when you look at it, and now I'll be very clear, I'm still not sure I'm buying that Marcus Peters had the control that they claimed him that they said he did.
It was just a terrible call, dude.
But I will say this.
I'll talk about it all day, but I mean, everybody
fine.
watched it. But go ahead. Yeah.
What I will say, though, is I equate this a little bit to a third base coach in baseball. If you're John Harbaugh in that scenario, you don't want to waste a challenge if you have no chance to win the challenge. At the very least, when you did watch the second replay, you said, okay, I see where John was coming from here. I'm not sure he's going to win it, but I at least see now that this wasn't the god-awful challenge I thought it was in real time.
That when they went up in the air and came down and the ball came flying out, you think he didn't catch that ball.
Because here's the thing: when you're talking about a challenge, especially when you're in a situation where you're down, you just had a back-breaking turnover for yourself inside the 10-yard line. That's kind of like the third base coach. Buck Showalter used to say this all the time. He talked to third base coaches and they'd brag and say, I didn't get a runner thrown out at the plate all year. Guess what Buck would say? Well, you had a lousy year then because you have to take some calculated risks from time to time. So I'll say at the very least, even if we say that was silly to call that a catch.
And we have many times in the past.
Right. At the very least, I do think it was when you saw the replay, it was at that point I said, all right, John, I see you taking the calculated risk here, that it made sense to at least gamble there because it was. I mean, look at the win probability swing on that play going the way it does. That's where you take the risk and say, you know what, I'll hate losing the timeout, but I've got to try here. And I think that's what John did with some of the guys upstairs looking at the replays and looking at the different angles that were afforded to them. And they took a calculated risk and it worked out, whether it was the right call or not. So you give John a lot of credit there. And there have been plenty of times where we've seen John challenge, although I think he's gotten way better at that in the second half of his tenure here in Baltimore. I think that was a thing, that narrative about John with challenges. I think that was
red
much
thing in
more
his sock when he would stalk the sidelines and just be pissed off and throw it out there.
And that's the thing. Everyone thought that this was kind of an emotional reaction, that you're just, you're throwing a Hail Mary here. When you did see the replay initially, even though I was still really skeptical, I at least looked at it and said, okay.
Is this the part where I text him and say I'll never question him again? Because I will.
Well, I don't know about that, but I like I said, I think he deserves some credit. Whether you thought the call ultimately they got it right or not, I think the calculated risk involved there and how big a swing that would be from a win probability standpoint, from a momentum standpoint, from a mojo standpoint, that's where I give him some credit, and to recognize that, hey, this has a chance at least. And if it has a real chance, think you got to try it here, because just think if you don't challenge it there, and let's say Indy goes down the field and scores a touchdown. Suddenly you're down 10 points and your offense put together a decent drive, but you stubbed your toe and you coughed the ball up inside the 10-yard line. I mean, that game could have gone a totally different direction. And maybe your defense at that point starts to wilt and says, well, our offense can't get out of its own way. Things can snowball very quickly in this league. You know that. We've seen that many times. Ravens on the good or bad side of that. But I just think that was such a huge swing for that to play out the way it did. And I'll say this, for as much as some people were complaining about some calls that went against the Ravens in the Pittsburgh loss last week, this is one you remember and say, the league's not out to get the Ravens. I think this one turned out quite favorably for them, based on some of the reaction you saw even after the call was overturned and the interception stood.
Even better for guys like me and Dennis Kolatzos who still, have those feelings about Indianapolis that I didn't have until I realized we've never won out there. And then I realized all I needed to do was stay away and they'd win. So that's what I did over the weekend. Luke Jones is here. He'll be in Owings Mills this week getting ready for Foxborough as long as we can stay COVID-free. I want to give a roll call to all of our sponsors. You guys see the Taharka Brothers Ice Cream. I'm going to have a special deal on that very soon and a code that'll be happening later in the week to order for the holidays. Our friends at Sporticulture and the Magma Lamp and the Black Magma that's getting going here that'll be bubbling all week long as we do Baltimore Positive Conversation. You can find that out at Sporticulture and sporticulture.com. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, the world-famous chicken and the waffle sandwiches, including the scrapple that I've been telling Don Moeller about. I gassed up at Royal Farms over the weekend. I've been working those tenders, and I'm going to get me a box of chicken here this week as well. Cole Roofing, a sponsor of the Community and Charity Series that's now begat all that we do here at Baltimore Positive. Bill Cole and I had a long chat about two sides of the aisle and friendships and all that sort of stuff, the deep stuff. We do that on a weekly basis. You can find that out at the front of BaltimorePositive.com. And our friends at Planet Fitness, working out. My dude, Teddy Atlas, is going to be joining me later on in the month, and we'll be talking about all sorts of work-ins and workouts, especially with COVID back, and we've got the winter coming and people getting, gaining a little bit of Thanksgiving weight. My wife's already working on the Thanksgiving calendar right now, so we will be eating all month long. We actually stopped and gave the king a ring to pick up some more tequila because elections will do that to you. Stop by and see them, Lottery Beer, Booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. I gave the king a ring, and Paul King, you could do that too in Rosedale, where we're about to get a new sponsor in Rosedale as well. Luke, I guess sort of circling the wagons on this game. We're going to talk more about, we'll break down what happened with the defense. We'll talk even more about Marcus Peters. But just the feeling about the exhale for the organization to get through this one, I think that's the bigger takeaway of all of this is, hey, they won. They won by 2 touchdowns. It wasn't easy, but they won. And the winning part was the most important thing because this is where things can get choppy in the middle of the season where everything starts to go wrong.
No question, including just managing Marlon Humphrey testing positive. I mean, we've seen other teams like the Titans where
it becomes an epidemic, right?
It becomes an outbreak. One player testing positive is not an outbreak, but you start having 2, 3, 4 players and a couple every day, like Tennessee did for a week or so, where you're just it's hard to think about football when you're in that context because you can't even meet in practice. So
when you win that game, you got to feel good about yourself. Just
yeah,
you do. You got to feel good.
And that's, clearly, the COVID part of this is going to, it's not going away. And it's something that every team's dealing with. And, the Ravens were fortunate. And you hope that, this was a reflection of the team and the organization as a collective group doing well with the protocols. But, that trouble is, that can pop up again. But it was just so important for them to get through the week and you get a win. My prediction, I think I called a 24-17 game. And one thing I said about it was, and I thought the Ravens would win, I figured it would be a no-frills kind of game. And, you look at this game, a couple, big defensive touchdown, of course, and Marcus Peters forcing a couple turnovers. Incredible performance by him. But you look at how that first half went, and the offense just as bad as we've seen it look in 2 years. That's how bad it was. And, they didn't flinch. They go into halftime, and John Harbaugh talked about a desire for them to pick up the tempo a little bit and put the game in Lamar's hands a little bit more and give him some short passes over the middle of the field, and it worked beautifully. And
19 to
they were
23, a buck 70. I mean, you'd like to see 3 touchdown passes in there, but that's okay.
yeah, but he was 10 for 10 in the second half. I mean, that's where he was.
And 13 rushes, which is probably on the high end of where you want him to be, right?
Yeah, but not outrageous. I mean, certainly you don't want 13 every single week for him. But if it's something where you need it, and certainly he scores a touchdown in a big spot to put them, they seize control, you'll take that. So it was very good to see. And, it's interesting because how much time did we spend last week talking about the fact that they outgained the Steelers, by over 2-1. And you look at the final numbers for this game and, Indianapolis outgained them. They had 339 yards. The Ravens had 266. And it really does speak to game situation, right? Managing the clock and taking care of the football and doing all those things. And Gus Edwards' fumble aside, the Ravens took care of the football and they converted not every third down. It's not as though their third down efficiency was all that anything memorable. They were 5 of 13, but
they did play the first half.
Well, exactly. Right. And I'm looking at it at the big, but you look in the second half, they were just so much more efficient, and they didn't panic. And how many times have we talked about this with the Kansas City games over the last couple of years? What we saw against Tennessee in January, we've talked about how it kind of felt from the players and coaches. I mean, coaches on down to the last guy on the team that they'd kind of lose themselves, right? And they'd start throwing the ball a lot, or just making mistakes, or some baffling decisions. They didn't lose their cool in that way. And I'm not someone that leans on that kind of stuff too much, because those talk about character and want to and effort and all those things. I mean, they're professionals. You expect that, but you really got the sense going into halftime that they took a deep breath and said, all right, guys, we played our worst half of football offensively since the Chargers playoff game. I'm not saying anyone mentioned that specifically, but you're thinking it if you're on the offensive side of the ball. But you look at it and you're down by 3 points. There's no reason to panic, no reason to blow things up or just trying to do crazy things. Get back to what you do best. And for the Ravens, that was increasing the tempo a little bit. And for Lamar Jackson, it was some quicker passes over the middle. And we've talked a lot about throwing outside the numbers and the lack of success there. We've talked a lot about needing to complete on some deep balls. And those are going to continue to be questions, even though I'll point out Lamar threw a pretty nice outside the numbers pass to Marquise Brown early in the game and he dropped it. So you had that as well. But you got a sense that they still were able to play within themselves. The offensive line settled in and settled down and played better. The offensive line is going to be an issue. I mean, I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we're sitting here saying just because they played better in the second half, you don't have Ronnie Stanley. If that's not a big deal, then why'd you pay him? I said that last week. I'll continue to say that. And that's not a knock on Orlando
Ditto Marlon
Brown.
Humphrey, and they just went and beat the Colts by 2 touchdowns on the road without both of them, right? And Mark Ingram, throw him in there.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, you're going to have injuries. I mean, you're going to have that.
Well, that's good when you can overcome them. That's huge.
But my point is, I mean, the offensive line, I'm guessing this isn't going to be the last time we're talking about the offensive line having some struggles. I think that's going to be part of what they deal with. And maybe that's going to be something that hinders them from playing full 60-minute, these boat race performances that they had so many times last year. Maybe we just need to accept that they're not going to be able to do that. But play better in the first half than they did this Sunday, than this week, and see more of what we saw in the second half. You can start to build some momentum. And now we haven't even mentioned him, Des Bryant. We'll see what that looks like. Barely played on Sunday. Certainly wasn't a factor in this game, but we'll see what that looks like in terms of, not that I expect the Des Bryant of 2014, but can he help them out inside the red zone? Can he help them out on some third down plays? We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I don't have high expectations, but you've watched the same passing game I've watched all year. Second half aside, it hasn't been very good for most of the season. So, get him into the mix, and we'll see what that looks like. But I was absolutely encouraged by what I saw in the second half. And like I said, I mean, I think this is the kind of game that I think turning point would be too strong, because, hey, they were 5-2 going into the game. It's not as though they were on a 4-game losing streak, anything like that. But everything they went through to play the defense, to play the way they did for the better part of 60 minutes, and the offense to just take control in the second half of that game. It really, it did remind you much more of the kind of play that we saw in 2019. And that's a great thing, knowing that the Ravens have some challenges coming up here over the next few weeks.
I am wearing my Liberty Pure Solutions hat. I'm pushing it into the camera right now. I'll tell you 1-800-CLEAN-WATER, residential plumbing, including my hot water heater, boiler services, water analysis, water treatment. They are water experts, and I have some well water out on my property at WNST. If you need them for your water analysis going into the winter, grab it right now. You never know what salt does. If you live on a place where the salt rolls off, you don't know what's in your water, you want to get it tested, you need clean water, Liberty Pure is there, 1-800-CLEAN-WATER. Also, our friends at Blondell Miller Schuler at damngoodlawyer.com. I'm looking forward to catching up with Todd this week, 410-687-7878. They are personal injury and workers' compensation lawyers. If you get injured, you got a friend there. They're in Essex, but they're all over Baltimore, and they will fight for you. 410-687-7878. Also, our friends at Raskin Global, empowering people to choose their financial future for over 33 years. Leonard Raskin came on last week, talked about the election and your money and the end of the year and taxes and all of that. Let them help you make your American dream a reality. Find Leonard at RaskinGlobal.com or on Facebook or on the front of Baltimore Positive. We have all of our sponsors, including Dennis out there, Bill Cole, and others coming soon to the front. Pizza John serving up that delicious pizza. I have not had a pineapple and ham pizza in about 5 years, and I literally was standing at Pizza John's about a week and a half ago when I went in there for a cheesesteak. This is the one that I was watching television and things were happening in the second half, and Ronnie Stanley got hurt. And I'm standing at Pizza John's. I looked up, and I'm like, I didn't know they had pineapple and ham on there. I knew they had anchovies because my mom got those. I'll never get those again. But pineapple and ham, that's what I'm going to do this week. Pizza John's, go see him. Get that meatball sub where they stuff the meatballs in there that Luke likes as well. You can find Luke in Owings Mills. You can find him out on Facebook and Twitter at Baltimore Luke. You can find me, Ness, at BaltimorePositive.com. With the all-new WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, we put it all in one place. You can find it at BaltimorePositive.com.